On September 11, 2001, the United States experienced the deadliest terrorist attack in its history. Nearly 3,000 Americans died that morning. Almost immediately, the U.S. invaded Afghanistan to hunt down Osama bin Laden. But the Bush administration was already eyeing another target. Over in the Middle East sat Saddam Hussein, a ruthless dictator whom the U.S. had kept under strict containment since the 1990 Gulf War. After 9/11, President Bush made three big claims. Saddam possessed chemical, biological, and maybe nuclear weapons. He had ties to al-Qaeda, and as part of an axis of evil, he posed a direct, imminent threat to the entire world. To legitimize a military response, the administration took its case to the global stage. Secretary of State Colin Powell went before the United Nations, holding up a vial of fake anthrax and presenting satellite photos of alleged weapons facilities. But the intelligence was deeply flawed, and European allies urged the U.S. to let weapons inspectors do their jobs. Citizens across the globe agreed. On a single day, up to 10 million people marched in the largest anti-war protest in history. Despite the global opposition and unverified intelligence, President Bush issued an ultimatum: leave Iraq in 48 hours or face the consequences. Saddam didn't budge. The United States chose to launch a preemptive attack against a sovereign nation. On March 20, 2003, the sky over Baghdad lit up with Tomahawk cruise missiles and precision-guided bombs. The Pentagon called the campaign shock and awe, aiming to hit government buildings so hard that Saddam's regime would crumble before it could fight back. A combined force of about 177,000 U.S. and British troops blitzed across the desert toward the capital. Iraqi forces put up scattered resistance, but they were entirely outmatched. The 3rd Infantry Division charged armored columns straight through the streets of Baghdad. Just 3 weeks after the invasion began, U.S. Marines rolled into the heart of the city. With the help of American troops, Iraqi civilians pulled down a massive statue of Saddam Hussein. That image beamed around the world, convincing millions that the war was practically won. President Bush landed on an aircraft carrier beneath a giant banner reading "Mission Accomplished," declaring that major combat operations in Iraq were officially over. The military had executed a flawless invasion to remove a dictator, but the United States had no functional plan for what came next. By wiping out the existing government without a replacement ready, they created a massive power vacuum. The initial combat was finished, but the true conflict was about to begin. The man placed in charge of rebuilding this vacuum was Paul Bremer, head of the Coalition Provisional Authority. Within his first 2 weeks, he made 2 administrative decisions that triggered a cascade of violence. This chart of Iraq's civil infrastructure illustrates the impact of Order Number 1, de-Baathification. This banned all members of Saddam's Baath Party from government jobs. Because the Baath Party ran the country's entire civic infrastructure, thousands of teachers, doctors, and civil servants were instantly fired, collapsing essential services overnight. Order Number 2 dissolved the entire Iraqi military. Hundreds of thousands of trained soldiers were sent home with no severance, no continued pay, and 0 future job prospects. By issuing those 2 memos, the coalition created an instant army of roughly 100,000 angry, armed, unemployed men with deep military training. They had a common enemy in the occupying American forces. An insurgency exploded across the country. Former soldiers and militants began planting cheap, devastating roadside bombs, known as IEDs. Meanwhile, foreign jihadists flooded the country, forming al-Qaeda in Iraq to orchestrate kidnappings and bombings that terrorized the population. U.S. forces found themselves locked in grueling, block-by-block urban combat in cities like Fallujah. Marines had to blow holes through residential walls rather than risk booby-trapped doors, fighting house to house against thousands of entrenched insurgents. To maximize the chaos, al-Qaeda deliberately targeted religious sites to provoke violence between the Sunni and Shia populations. In 2006, they bombed the Al-Askari Mosque, one of the holiest Shia shrines in the world, blowing its golden dome to pieces and igniting a brutal retaliatory cycle. Neighborhoods were ethnically cleansed, and death squads roamed the streets of Baghdad. Administrative negligence had inadvertently engineered a heavily armed insurgency and a 3-way civil war. The traditional military tactics of clearing cities and retreating to massive bases were completely failing to stop the bloodshed. By 2007, Iraq was spiraling into total collapse. Facing immense public pressure, President Bush authorized a surge of over 20,000 additional troops, and appointed General David Petraeus to implement a radically different counterinsurgency strategy. Instead of hunkering down on heavily fortified bases, Petraeus ordered American troops directly into Iraqi neighborhoods. The goal was to clear an area of insurgents, hold it by living alongside the civilians, and build trust by restoring local services. At the exact same time, Sunni tribal leaders in the heartland of the insurgency had grown tired of al-Qaeda's brutal executions. In a movement known as the Anbar Awakening, former insurgents reached out to the Americans. The very fighters who had been planting roadside bombs were now standing shoulder to shoulder with U.S. Marines. Combined with the troop surge, this localized alliance yielded immediate results. Violence across the country plummeted, and sectarian killings in Baghdad fell by more than half. The United States military managed to stabilize the region, but only after unlearning decades of traditional combat doctrine, accepting steep casualties, and aggressively partnering with their former enemies. Long before the surge, Saddam Hussein had vanished, but in late 2003, U.S. Special Forces found the dictator hiding in a tiny underground dirt hole. He was handed over to an Iraqi court, found guilty of crimes against humanity, and executed. When President Obama took office, he inherited a war that was winding down. In 2011, the final American convoy rolled across the border into Kuwait. There was no victory parade and no grand surrender ceremony, just a quiet flag lowering in Baghdad and a long drive home. The absence of a celebration reflected a grim reality. Weapons inspectors confirmed Iraq had absolutely no stockpiles of chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons. The stated justification for the invasion was a mirage. This chart shows the staggering final ledger of the conflict. The United States spent an estimated $2 trillion. Over 4,400 American service members lost their lives, alongside a devastating toll of roughly 100,000 Iraqi civilians. The United States military proved it could dismantle a regime in a matter of weeks, but launching a preemptive invasion based on flawed intelligence with zero plan for the aftermath destabilized the entire region. It created the conditions for groups like ISIS to emerge years later, and it fractured public trust in government institutions in ways that are still visible today.